We are in studio with Seamus, Byrne and Ray Johnston. And as of December 17th, you cannot be finding the porn on Tumblr, apparently. Now, Tumblr's had an interesting journey over the last couple of years. Of course, there was a story about how accessible child exploitation material was on Tumblr a few weeks ago, and they have reacted in quite a drastic way, Ray Johnston. So tell me the story of how Tumblr has arrived at removing all the porn from their platform.
Yeah, basically they've looked at a situation where, child pornography was, I think it's fair to say, rife on the site. Apple responded by removing the Tumblr app from the App Store. There was a huge amount of backlash. So they've gone ahead and started flagging any kind of content that it sees as inappropriate. And it is, once again, like all of these companies do, using an algorithm in order to find it.
Yeah.
So the kinds of things that they're flagging right now aren't necessarily pornographic. Now, you've got things like artworks that just happen to be of women.
Yeah.
Fully clothed, being flagged as being pornography.
But also nudity doesn't also, in and of itself, necessarily can translate to pornography. Like
Absolutely.
Has anyone been into an art gallery of late? You know what I mean? Like there's some pretty big gaps in there. But if you have a space on the internet where people can go consume erotic material consenting and share it and in a social context, is it an inherently bad thing?
Yeah, I think that it is an inherently bad thing to get rid of it. I think Tumblr has been a bit of a haven for many people all around the world to find their sexuality, find communities that resonate with what you don't see in mainstream. Or mainstream porn, for that matter. When you look at pornography sites, they're not really very varied in the kind of content that they're producing and the kind of gaze that they're producing it for. Tumblr was a place where the queer community could gather and find their people. This is definitely a blow for those kinds of places.
And it's also, the other thing is it wasn't a dedicated porn space.
No.
And I think that's an important distinction where we've built a line in the sand in the internet where there's like dedicated porn websites, and then there's dedicated, the mainstream web, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, where those things are banned. And surely there is value in spaces that bridge, spaces that can be what you build them to be. And I think some of the appeal, and indeed some of the danger of Tumblr, has been that it built communities that were often quite niche that actually did sit in those boundaries, as you say, aspects of the queer community, areas of erotica that sort of sit in that zone. And I do think there's value in preserving some of that dynamic. And it just seems like a really big, sudden move to deal with a problem that did need to be dealt with, no question, but it just seems like a really strangely full-on approach.
Tumblr once was this innovative startup website that created these spaces for people to build communities around kind of interesting ideas. It was kind of just a micro-blogging platform, really. But then, it sold to AOL. That was, I think, the beginning of this end sequence. But it did quite a good job of sort of maintaining its integrity for a long time. AOL then became part of Yahoo. Yahoo then sold off the whole AOL sort of business, which is now called Oath, to Verizon. And this, I think, is that first big moment where the big new parent company has suddenly been hit by the idea that this thing that they own has a lot of very, very inappropriate material lurking around on it. And I think they've then taken the approach of saying, well, let's just get rid of all of the things that have anything to do with anything slightly inappropriate because we just don't want to have to deal with it.
Including #lesbian.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Wow.
Exactly. This is going to be about people continuing to feel othered and ostracised and not like a normal part of society.
Are there ways in which we can let niche spaces, spaces that exist in the grey areas, survive when they're still owned by big publicly traded corporations? Is there any test case out there that we can look to as like that is a great example where they've been able to keep niche communities and keep the flavour of that community while still being traded on Wall Street?
I mean, I do feel like Reddit is still a pretty good example in that, they've had negative responses from the communities that live there while really trying to walk that line of maintaining the ability for people to run, all kinds of communities there, in ways that skirt those kind of boundaries, but let ideas flourish within that environment in certain ways. One of the things that they've done is, you know, again, sort of Apple can be very strict about what apps are allowed to do. Basically, the Reddit apps don't let you get to all the kind of weirder parts of Reddit or anything that is considered inappropriate by Apple. It's just not available through the app. But then you go to the web version and all of that is still there. Whereas,
I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
It's like, you know, Tumblr is kind of in that space where they've said, well, Apple's kicked us off, therefore, like, let's get rid of everything so we can get back on Apple instead of finding that middle road.
Honestly, I think that the solution to all of this always is to have an element of humanity in there. Only people can look at things and go, all right, this is a problem. You know, once we start relying on algorithms, they're going to pick up all sorts of things that are completely irrelevant to what they're after.
I mean, I think there might be something to said for the way in which that Facebook does it. As much as they do it, you know, they don't do a great job. They do have, you know, a flagging system, and they have teams of humans around the world who, you know, do that horrible job of trying to say yes, no.
Yeah.
Now, where they draw that line of yes, no is clearly one of the big issues around how people think Facebook is dealing with those problems. But they're doing it at a scale that nobody else has ever had to, you know, do this kind of thing. If you applied a very similar process to what Facebook has done to something that isn't a, you know, 2 billion people scale, but instead to a, you know, 100 million user type scale, there's probably quite a good way that you can, again, write those rules and create that algorithmic flagging system that then actually has a human say yes, no, yes, no.
Because the criticisms of Facebook is that there's not enough people involved doing that, and they don't look after the people that are doing that.
That's a really big one.
So if you do take that but improve on it, everything needs improving on. This is the problem. No one's nailed it.
For all of the things that they have, the multitudinous things at which Facebook have gotten wrong, I think if you look at the wide array of online communities out there, you'd have to argue that, for better, for worse, they've probably been the most on the front foot about trying to fix their communities.
Yeah.
A little bit after, you know, maybe a little bit later than they should have in some cases. But
and I think that you could argue that that's in response to being possibly the most scrutinised.
Yeah.
You know, like Twitter is up there, but nowhere near in the same, you know, capacity or level that Facebook is. So they do have to respond to this. There is a lot of users and a lot of backlash.
I mean, days like this, I reckon Google's really grateful that Google Plus didn't take off, because then they'd have had to have dealt with it.
And that's it, you know, Tumblr, if there'd been more of this chipping away at the question that thrown at them more often, are you doing enough? What are you doing about these kinds of things? Then they might have slowly built the processes. Whereas instead it's just, you know, the absolute sort of, you know, sledgehammer approach in the end.
They've done the thing that all of these places do, which is a simple solution for a complex problem. It doesn't exist.
One of the statements that came out of Tumblr's leadership is, in response to the loss of consenting adult content, let's call it that, is that they've basically said that there's no shortage of sites on the internet that feature adult content. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a line in the sand. Yes, there's plenty of places that do porn on the internet, but what was special, I think, about Tumblr for lots of people is that it exists in a space where you could express your sexuality in ways that bridged between normal everyday communication and sort of social media expression and erotica and pornography. There's a zone there. And to his point, are there other places that replicate that? So we know there's other places that do porn. We get that. And there's mainstream on the internet. But are there other places that legitimately replicate that grey area, that limbo land?
If they exist, I want to know about them.
Do we all have to go to Ello?
Because it is a really interesting place. Like, it was a place where people would write, you know, crappy poems and share their art and their fan
screw you, mate. My poems were great.
His live journal, maybe there's still some good action going on over there.
They all seem to still be in the past, though. Like the idea of a space that just collaborates all of your different interests and ideas and throws sexuality in the mix there as, you know, part of everyday normal life, as opposed to something that needs to be, you know, relegated to a hidden dark corner of the internet that we should all be ashamed of.
I mean, you know, you can tie it together with the whole question of money as well, right? Because in the end, this ties back into this, you know, new idea of the trust economy, you know, the fact that YouTube, you know, programmatic advertising, all the advertisers started to go, wait, my ads are appearing against what kind of content?
Yeah.
That meant the money starts to dry up if there's any kind of questionable content. And again, questionable, I'm using that in the incredibly mainstream sense of that kind of advertiser term.
Different things to different people. Yeah.
I find that so wild, though, because the most heavily consumed content on the internet is porn. The amount of hits that you'd get on your ad are incredible. Advertisers should be all over porn. porn.
Yeah.
That's going to be the headline from this episode. Advertisers should be all over porn. All right, there is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show. Yes, it is a podcast. That's why I've got headphones. It's not a thing I wear normally. You can find it right now on all good podcasting apps. And if you have a topic that you would like us to cover, we're actually going off the air over summer, but if you head along to the ABC News YouTube channel and you leave a comment, we're going to be trawling that for ideas for what we do in Download This Show in 2019, and we will be back around about Australia Day. We'll see you then. Bye.